Hello everyone. Today with us is Nayantara Nair, and she is a researcher, storyteller, a playwright, and today's topic of our interview is theater and plays and playwriting, especially writing those big elaborate plays. And she is expert in that field itself. So Nayantara, thank you so much for coming on Waman Matters. So beginning with this itself, that what is the history and play of like where did this thing start on an international and national level? Like what is the origin of this thing itself in history?
Yeah. Thank you. It's so nice to be here, and it's so nice to be talking about theater. Theater is my first love, and so really thrilled to be here. That's a really good question. I think the most interesting thing about theater is that it's almost always been with human society. It's existed for as long as we've had language, for as long as we've worshipped. So some of the earliest instances are not a proper play, but something like a play. Something that really resembles it. Historians say we can trace it back to the 20th century BCE in places like Egypt, where what would happen is on the banks of the river Nile, there would be these grand celebrations for the various gods of Egypt. And they tell stories and do theatrical enactments as a part of that religious celebration. So, for example, there's a story of a very great Egyptian god called Osiris, who is betrayed by his brother Set, who essentially traps him in this box and then cuts him up and scatters his pieces around the earth. And in the story, it's his wife, Osiris's wife, Isis, and her son, who have to go find all of these scattered pieces, bring them back together, give Osiris a proper funeral, and then eventually also defeat, Set. And that entire story would be reenacted on the banks of the Nile, regularly. So people would wear masks. There would be some kinds of actors, but traditionally in those cases, it was more religiously sort of taken. So the people who were, taking on those roles were also thought to imbibe the spirits of the gods themselves. And we see this kind of close tie between religious ceremony and theatrical performance all over the world. So, in amongst Native American communities in the American continents, in India, in Greece, in China, in Indonesia, in Egypt, all of these places, that's kind of the origin of theater. Or that's where it comes from. So it actually has a very interesting, spiritual slash even magical kind of beginning. Just to give you another example, in Bali, there are these various kinds of dances that were held, and very often before the tribe went off to war, there would be something called a war dance, right? And the idea was if they danced like they were going to defeat their enemy, they would defeat their enemy, and that's a concept that anthropologists call sympathetic magic. So the idea is, something is like something else. And so that kind of, how do we say it, that kind of copying almost, right? And that enactment actually comes from that place. So I think that in that sense, the history of theater lies in our connection to the unknown, our connection to the magical, our connection to what we cannot see and cannot understand. And that's kind of where the history of theater comes from.
Okay, so to be honest, this question comes in the mind of people, not a question but a curiosity, that why
Yeah.
humans need plays and theaters, and how
Mm.
does that adds to our entertainment of humans
Yeah.
specially. So what is your
Yeah.
observation regarding that?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, especially because of the age that we live in. We live in a time when there's so much media of various kinds, from movies to television shows to podcasts. But I think that what differentiates theater from all of that is that theater is live, and theater requires you sharing a space with other people, right? It demands that people come together and they watch something together. And when you're in that physical space, you are not just responding to what the actors are doing on stage. You are responding to what is in the air of the auditorium. How is your neighbor watching it? Did they gasp? If they gasp, you gasp louder. If the audience, one person laughs, you laugh louder, right? And it's such a space of communion, and that's something that's really disappearing, the further and further we go into the digital realm. And don't get me wrong, I love the digital realm. I watch Netflix as much as anyone else does, I'm sure. But sometimes I really feel like I want to go into a space, I want to be with people, I want to watch something live. The other part of theater that really benefits us is because theater is live, it has a kind of excitement. Technically anything could happen, like even if you know, okay, this is a story, I know this story, I've heard it 100 times before, say the Mahabharata, right? I've heard it 100 times before. Even when you know exactly how it's going to end, watching it live, there's this sense of tension, because actually anything could happen. The actor could forget their line, the set could fall down, one character could go missing, and that gives it a sort of almost an aura of danger, makes it very exciting. And I think finally we need theater today because one of my favorite sort of theater personalities is someone called Anne Bogart, and she works for the City Company. She used to work with the City Company in New York, and she talks about this idea in theater called resonance. And she says that theater's job is to create resonance with an audience. So I think that's the real quality of theater. That idea that I might be enacting the life of a mythical kings from 3,000 years ago, but something about their story resonates with you. There is sort of like dropping a pebble in water, and there's all of these different sort of, the way that it resonates outward, that's happening even with theatrical action. Because by listening to other people's stories, by listening to stories that might seem completely disconnected from our own lives, those stories and those theatrical engagements are giving us questions we can ask about our own lives, about our society, about the times that we live in now. So I think that's the real value of theater, and that's why I don't think anything can really replace it.
So, whenever any playwright writes a play, he decides,
Mhm,
let's start with writing this script and this story.
mhm.
How do
Yeah.
you do it from scratch, from nothing to a final glamorous product? What goes
Yeah.
into and what does not go into this?
Okay, so I should start off by saying there are multiple ways of working, and many writers have different systems. Theater groups have different systems. So sometimes a theater group might take a finished play and put it on stage. Sometimes theater groups will work with the writer. So the writer will be in the room with the actors and the director, and through devising games, ideas, discussion, they will do lots of things, and the writer will go and write the play really based off of what they've done, and it will be a process that happens side by side. But if you are writing a play from scratch without that kind of support system, I mean, the first thing is you've got to have an idea. You've got to have some sense of what you want to say. So if you say you wanted to write a play about a romance, you wanted to tell a story about two young lovers, you'd have to have some idea of, okay, who are the lovers? Why am I telling this story? So an understanding of what is at the center of the play. I think that's the first thing, that even if you don't know the answer fully, you have to some inkling, one little bit about it you've got to know to begin writing. The way that I go about it after that, after I have that one idea, is there's a lot of time spent thinking. Unlike in lots of other areas, when you're writing, I think this is true for all writers, even when you are not writing, you are writing because you are busy thinking about your idea. You're letting that entire process sit in your head. It's germinating, it's changing. So that you've got to sort of respect that. Don't feel guilty if you're not immediately writing everything, but you should also plan and structure. So start thinking about your characters. I write a lot of notes. So I will write something called a character arc. So I'll say, okay, this is what my character is called. This is how old they are. This is what they do. I try doing that. Then I say, okay, what is the world of the play? Is it set in modern times? Is it actually set in some place that could be like my house? Or is it set in a future fantasy world? Or is it set in the past? Is it set in a different country? So build the world of the play. What are the rules of that world? Is it a world in which everyone is actually a dragon and no one is human? Is it those kinds of questions you've got to ask yourself? And then you just got to sit down and start writing. I think that the one thing I wish that I had been told more when I started playwriting was your first draft is going to suck. It's going to be terrible. You can't do anything about it. Don't worry. Your first draft is where all your ideas, everything you're thinking about will just literally be vomited out onto the page. It's everything. It's not fine tuned. It isn't crafted carefully, but you need that, because only once you have that can you start to add in detail, make it more interesting, more nuanced, make it a mystery, take out bits of information, reorder it. All of that needs that first draft. So my first piece of advice really is finish writing your first draft, no matter how bad you think it is. Once you finished your first draft, maybe if you think it's ready, you should start sharing it with people, because a play script is very rarely something that is written only to be read. It is always written to be put up on stage. Nobody writes a play thinking, oh, someone's just going to read it, right? So you need to share it with people to see how much they can follow just by reading it. And share it with people that you trust, with people in the theater community, with people whose opinion and tastes you agree with also, and then gather all of that feedback and take only what you really need, and then sit down and write a second draft. Definitely, right? Your second draft is where your play will suddenly change. You'll have all these new ideas. Everything, will get really complicated. You'll suddenly say, I want the head to be the tail and the tail to be the head. And your second draft usually will be something very different from what you originally intended. And at that stage, you might want to do something called a rehearsed reading if it is available to you. A rehearsed reading is simply you try to find some actors. It doesn't have to be professional actors, but people with sense of the stage, a sense of how to perform, and say, I'm giving you the scripts, rehearse for one day, and then we'll do an open reading with an audience of peers that you trust, and that's a great process, because hearing your play read out makes the biggest difference and is really important for your third draft, which comes after that. And usually around your third draft, and this will change. Some people write 10 drafts, some people write 2 drafts or even 1 draft. But around your third draft is when your play starts to take the form you really want. You start to become a little bit more happy with it. And once that draft is done, once you say, okay, it's not actually ever finished. You can always edit, but you say, I have to give it now to this theater company who's going to perform it. I have to give it to these actors. It's very important to know that you only finished part one of your play. Writing the play is the first part of it, maybe, but a play's journey continues well past the writer. So give it to your actors and say goodbye. It's now their baby. They have to figure out what to do with it. They might come back and ask you questions. They might want to, add an element in the character's sort of psyche that you never thought about, or they might say, oh, the plot has this point here. And so that's what's so beautiful about it. It's such a collaborative process. So many people are pulled into your world. And I think as a writer, if even you can get your directors and your actors to believe in that plot, in that story you've created, that itself is such a satisfying feeling. So I think that's sort of the beginning to end of the play process. There are lots of in-between questions that people will have. How do you write convincing characters? How do you write good dialogue? How do you build a plot? Those take a little bit more detail. And I would say that all of those things, one of the lovely things about the internet is you can learn a lot of those things just by reading. But definitely if you can, enroll in script writing workshops, playwriting workshops, they'll really help you understand some of those basic they're almost like the bones of a play, right? You need the bones to be able to construct the entire play well. If you're thinking about the play as a human, as a being, as a person, actually, you need the bones to be able to build the rest of the human as well. So it is very important to learn some of those tricks, some of those formal kind of formal ways of structuring your story. All of that is important. But the most important thing is, do you have something to say? So that's really, I'd say, the starting point. What is it you want to say?
What goes into the implementation of a play? Like in a way that you have done with the hypothesis, you have written a story, you have everything is on the paper. Now it goes
Yeah.
for the implementation. How many
Yeah.
stakeholders are involved while the implementation?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I think that it depends on, again, it varies a bit, but at least minimum there will be a director, there will be a producer. The producer is usually the person who's funding it or is helping you find funding, or under whose banner the play is coming out. Then there are the actors, of course. Then there is everyone involved in production. So your lighting designers, your set designers, your costume artists, your makeup, and maybe even if you have dance, your choreographers, your singers. So depending on your play, there'll be all of these other people, and they are all stakeholders. But your final stakeholder is your audience. Because in a play, your audience is also a stakeholder. They also have something to gain. So that implementation process sort of begins maybe with a playwright, and then, like I was saying, the play travels out through many, many people. And what you want ideally is for each person to fully realize they're a stakeholder. Your director and producer have to really believe in your play. Your actors have to really believe in your play. Your costume designer also has to really believe in your play. And that sense of believing in the play has to travel from the writer all the way to the audience. If it doesn't travel to the audience, I don't know if the play has been successful. In my opinion, it wouldn't have been very successful, you know?
Okay, so today's world is very much like movies. Now we can see on
Yeah,
online,
yeah,
and there was a time where movies we need to go offline, see in a theater.
yeah,
But now the challenge for plays is that how, for example, the online challenge is a big challenge for play and theater
yeah,
itself. So how in this chaos, how can the play sustain itself?
yeah. That's
Like what we can do for this?
yeah. I think you're right, especially with the pandemic and with COVID. It's been a big question. All theater people have been asking, how do you compete with big streaming platforms when the best part about plays are very often the liveness of it? There have been some interesting experiments that have been happening. So I myself worked with a Bombay theater company and a California theater company to produce a series of plays for Zoom. That was like the specific. So it was still a play. It wasn't a movie, but it was written as a play, it was rehearsed like a play, and then it was shot like a movie, but it's still technically a play in its structure. So that's one way, as in you have to keep experimenting with form. You can never assume that, just because something has always been done one way, it should always be done one way. I think that the other thing is, we need to really push the uniqueness and the value that can be gained out of live experiences. I mean, you think about it, for the last 1 year and maybe for the next 1 year, so many of us are going to be trapped in our houses by ourselves, only surrounded by family, sometimes completely alone. It's important. Humans are, we're gregarious. We need company. Even if not all the time, we need to go out and be amongst people. And I think that pushing that as a concept, that when you're going out, you're not just going out, you're not in a crowd, but in a play, you are really sharing an experience with strangers. You don't know the person sitting next to you, but for that 1 hour, that 1.5 hours, you are occupying the same world, and it's this wonderful world of imagination. I think that's something that really has to be stressed. The other thing is, there needs to be more funding for the arts, and this is what every theater person will tell you. There's such a lack of funding for the arts in general, for theater definitely, and there's a lack of institutional support. I think the places in which theater really thrive in the world are places where governments have realized there's such a benefit to encouraging these kinds of cultural events. And there are spaces available to people to experiment, try new things, come up with daring new kinds of plays and ideas. So that's really the only way to combat not even combat, but just to even like match a little bit or hold fort against the influx of digital that we're seeing right now, you know?
As a storyteller and a writer, how do you make sure to showcase and reflect the current socio-economic, political, and many more real things going on national and international and in the contemporary society without hurting those stakeholder sentiments, which is means how do you manage
Yeah.
that art?
That's a tough, like, it's definitely one of the harder jobs of being a writer, which is you don't want to always accuse people, say, this is happening wrong, you want to try to instead give them a situation where they can see something from someone else's perspective. And I think that's the most important part for me of being a storyteller. Can I open up a way of thinking about something that normal life doesn't allow you to? So you think of, this situation as being a certain way. Can I give you a slight tilted view, just so you say, okay, actually it's like this, but it's also like this? And that's something that you've got to do as a writer. I think that if you are a writer or any kind of artistic practitioner, you are always creating with by being influenced by things that are happening around you. You live in this world, you aren't separate from it. Your work is always political, your work is always talking about experiences that you are having. The the danger is in thinking that your experience is the universal experience, in my opinion. So I come from a very specific class background, from a very specific caste background. I have a certain amount of educational privilege, and my experiences are therefore one line. When I'm writing, I do definitely draw from my own experiences. I can't draw from someone else's, but I do try to sort of remember that there are billions of people on this planet and many of them don't share my experiences. So how can I tell this story in a way that's true to me, but that also at least tries to show that it is not that my way is correct. It's just that this is the way I've seen it. And I think that lots of writers can try to do that, but it's definitely something that I struggle with, and I'm constantly trying to do better and to understand a little bit better, and do in a more full and more holistic kind of way. But I think that the one thing you've got to do is you've got to read widely, you've got to watch widely, you've got to listen to people from all kinds of backgrounds and hear stories from all kinds of backgrounds, and that definitely will help.
As a playwright and a storyteller itself, what is the essence of your profession, which is seen in society, in our nation, and especially in your life?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think for me, sort of the way that I see it is, we are storytelling creatures, human beings. We live off of stories. Language, language is used best to tell stories, and actually, the way that we function about anything ultimately comes down to a story. Whether you are, a very religious person or a very scientific person or someone in between, most of the way that we understand things is we are telling stories about them. So for me, that is what is the essence of being a storyteller, that connects me to everyone else that's living, to all the other people out there. I think that the value of this personally is that, it really does help you step into someone else's shoes, even if only for 1 hour. It allows you to see the world from someone else's viewpoint, and that's what's so interesting. I mean, I used to love reading as a child because, it really did take me. I mean, it's such a cliche. People say all the time, oh, reading a book takes you to another world, but it's so true. It takes you to all kinds of places you've never been to. It takes you into worlds and social systems that are nothing like your own. I remember when I was a child reading, like Enid Blyton books. They're so British. They're very British English, and that world is nothing like mine. I don't have any of the things they were describing, but it was so interesting to be able to go off and see that world. And the same is true even just within India, which is such a vast country. Your life is probably nothing like my life, is nothing like the life of someone living in Orissa or someone living in Kerala or someone living in Kashmir, right? So, reading and telling and hearing stories and writing stories about these different places is some way of accessing that, of understanding a little bit more about something that isn't like your own life. That, for me, that's the essence of it.
So, what are the inspirational moments of your life which you feel that you must share with the people, which will help them to become a better human being? I hope so.
I hope so. I think that I've had a couple of moments. I think that when I was in college in Chennai, I was studying sociology, and I used to work in. I didn't work, but I was doing theater as a part of the college theater club, so not at all professionally. And I had started to realize that I had such a love for theater. But I didn't. I was feeling very conflicted about it because I was scared. I was like, is there enough money in theater? Will I make a living? Will my parents approve? And my HOD of the time was a really lovely lady, and I think she could tell that I was very troubled. I didn't know what I wanted to do after my third year, and when I went to have a conversation with her about this, I was telling her a little bit. I said, I really love sociology. I really love learning about these things, but I don't know what to do. How do I do this? And she had some of the best advice that I've ever gotten. She said, if you find something that, is not just that you love doing, but that challenges you, that pushes you, that makes you want to wake up in the morning to do it, you have to do it. She said, I'm not, she was saying, I'm not trying to say, oh, follow your passion, don't worry about money. Money is important. Of course it is, right? But she was saying, you have to decide that that is the thing you will do. And you will find some other way doing the other things, of supporting yourself, making money, whatever it is. And so that was her advice to me. And I thought that it was such good advice, because she wasn't just saying in a very sort of dreamy way, oh, follow your dreams, do what you want. She was saying it in a way that for me resonated, because she said, it's something that you're desperate to do. If you have that desperation, you will have to find a way to do it. You will force yourself. So for me, that was a really a big changing moment. I think that another kind of moment of great inspiration was when I was in Bombay and I was studying there as well. We'd gone out to do I was studying documentary filmmaking at that point, and we had gone out to do some interviews, and we had gone out to talk to different kinds of people. And it was amazing because we were talking to people from across the city. People from various class backgrounds, various professional backgrounds, different parts of the country. And all of these people were in love with Bombay, as a city. They loved it. They were just like, this is a city where we've all come here to make, to find our dreams, to make our money, to live our lives. And it was so amazing to me because many of them were going through hard periods in their life. Some of them had lost their jobs, some of them had sick people at home, and all of them were still so amazingly grateful for being able to live in this city, being able to work there. They were so grateful for what they did have, and it really did sort of give me a moment of pause. It put a lot of my own worries in perspective, and after that I think I found it much easier to not let my worries take me over so much whenever they come at me. When I sort of have the ability to go, okay, fine, yes, all of this is happening, these things are bad, these 10 things are bad, but you have at least 3 good things. That kind of perspective, I think it was very important. So, yeah.
What are the movies, books, talks that you want to recommend people?
Okay, so I think that let's start with books maybe. I'm reading some really great books right now. Some of them are excellent. So I'm reading recently. I was reading a book called Milk Teeth, and it's by an Indian author. Her name is, I'm just looking at it. It's Amrita Mahali, and you know her. You know the author. No, it's a really lovely book. It's about Bombay. Essentially, it's based out of, I think, out of Matunga, and it's a very interesting book. That was a really great read. Another excellent book that I read recently was this book called Kitchen by a Japanese author named Banana Yoshimoto. It's a very beautiful book about sadness and about home, about grief, about everyday objects and things. It's such a gorgeous book. And maybe my third book recommendation would be, I think, what's the last thing that I read that was really wonderful? I read this really great book by, it's called Kirke, and it's by Madeline Miller. And I think she's an American author, and it's a Greek fantasy that's told from a very different kind of perspective. It twists the story about this witch Kirke that everyone knows is this very bad witch, and it says it from her perspective. So I think those are 3 book recommendations. Movie recommendations, I think I would recommend, I recently watched a German film called The Lives of Others. It was fantastic. It was a very good film. It's set in post World War II Germany, and it was such a beautiful movie. And one more movie recommendation. Oh, I have a Tamil movie recommendation that I rewatched recently. It's called Periyarum Perumal, and it's by Pariyarum Perumal by Mari Selvaraj, and it's a book about caste and about caste in Tamil Nadu, and it's a very well made. It's sad and tough, but it's also funny and charming, and it's an amazing soundtrack. So I would definitely recommend that. And talks, maybe just for some, if anyone is listening who's interested in playwriting, I would recommend that they look up the talks of Simon Stephens, who is a British playwright who has given some very interesting talks and master classes on YouTube and things like that around playwriting. I would also recommend they go and they read the City Companies, it's SITI, their blog. and their blog has a lot of very interesting articles about playwriting in general. Oh, there's also one more podcast I would recommend. Um, On Being with Krista Tippett, and she's an American, and it's a lot to do with. She talks a lot about spirituality, but she also talks to poets, to scientists, to astrologers, astronomers. She's talked to religious figures, all kinds of people, and it's a very. And you can sort of look through the podcast based on the topics that are interested to you, and some of them are just very amazing podcasts. So those would be my recommendations.
Do you have any last question for me? This
I
is
have,
the
I have a
last
question.
question.
I have a question for you. I mean, I think that it's so interesting that you're doing this and that you're interviewing so many interesting people. How did you start? What really pushed you to begin this?
The honest answer in a gist I will give.
Yeah.
So the honest answer is that it helps me to expand my mind and empowers me psychologically.
Hmm.
So that is the only reason I do, and there is no other such big
Okay,
reason.
that's a great reason. Thank you so much for having me.
Okay, so guys and people and everyone, I hope you have loved this interview and you have taken as much as possible from this interview. And thank you, Nan Tara, for speaking with us. And wish you a lot of glorious journey ahead. And I hope people will also become the best version of their own self after watching your interview.
Thank you so
I
much.
hope they have watched now.
I hope they watch more plays. Okay. Thank you so much.